Are you ready to turn your investments into retirement income? Listen in as Jeremy Keil and his guests reveal ways you can make smarter retirement, investment, and tax planning decisions to achieve your ideal retirement. You will learn more about your money so you can feel better about your money and make better money decisions. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to Retirement Revealed. I'm your host, Jeremy Keil, and we're here to turn your retirement savings into a consistent income. Now, today we're not talking so much about savings, so much about income. We're talking about debt. We've got Lyle Solomon on the line here, and he'll be sharing with us some simple tips for saving more money and paying down debt. Lyle, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeremy. Happy to be here.
You got it. And a few things I found interesting about you is your website says you're a payday loan crusader and you help 6,000 people become debt-free over the course of your career. Let's talk about a little bit about that.
Okay, certainly. Just a real quick background on that. Over the last 20 years, I started out working with debt collectors, credit card companies, banks, and companies who were owed money. And in the course of that, I found many similarities with the people that I was dealing with on the other side of the table. And so as a result, over the last at least 3 years, I have become a part of a group called Oakview Law Group, which focuses on debt resolution. And in that process, I have been able to bring the things that I learned previously about how creditors look at debt, and I have so far been, had success in helping debtors then, the consumers, reach out to those creditors and be able to resolve those debts, most of the time without resorting to bankruptcy or other drastic measures.
Yeah, that's a drastic measure, something you generally want to avoid. And you use some terms there, debtor, creditor. A creditor, think of it like the credit card. Like you owe somebody some money. And when you owe somebody some money, you're in debt. That makes you a debtor. And it's been interesting. I like, too, what you said. You've helped the debtors, the people that owe money, reach out to the people that they owe the money to try to resolve whatever the issue is. I got a feeling a lot of people, when they are in debt, they're maybe trying to hide from the people they owe money to. It sounds like maybe that's not the best way to go.
Absolutely. I reflect on my own life as a 20-something and dealing with creditors, and the approach that I had during that time period was very much a head in the sand ostrich approach. And I found out very quickly that doesn't work. And yet I am constantly surprised in dealing with consumers who owe money to people that many of them, at whatever age they are, think that might be an effective approach. And as I said, in previous practice, I had the responsibility of telling those individuals, you can hide in the sand, your head in the sand as much as you want to, but we have found you, and my job now is to take further steps to assist the creditor, the credit card company, the bank, who may it be, in finding ways to satisfy those debts.
Yeah, right on. The people, you borrow money, you owe the money, and so that's what the creditor is trying to figure out. You owe us money. How can we get the money that you owe? And yet at the same time, there's maybe some different circumstances that come about, and that's where you come in the middle to say, well, okay, if you owe the money, somebody gets owed the money, let's come to a resolution so that everyone can come out ahead. That's probably a better thing than just ignoring it or hopefully avoiding court costs and things like that.
Well, yeah, one thing that a lot of consumers I've spoken with fail to realize is that, number one, when you enter in into some kind of loan agreement, that is a contract. And most of them are legally enforceable by the courts. Second part of that people don't always realize is that when you borrow money from a bank, credit card, almost anybody, there is an interest charged with that borrowing. And that interest, majority of the time, does not stop until the debt is completely paid. So I have had a lot of instance in the past where I've gone to court. My client has filed suit to try and collect on the debt. I go to court, the individual being sued doesn't show up. I get a judgment from the court, and right on the judgment it says, beginning today, interest at the rate, I'm in California, so interest at the rate of 10% per annum begins to accrue to that amount. So, for a person that had a high interest loan, and I've seen them 30% and higher, that may be a savings now that, they're only dealing with an interest rate of 10%. But the fact remains the same that interest, whether it's no matter what the percentage rate on it, it continues to build up, to accrue until the debt is actually paid.
Yeah, and one thing you told me earlier is just because you say, I can't pay, doesn't mean they will go away. I love it because it rhymes. It's probably a good life advice for a lot of things. And some people listening to this are thinking, how does this even apply to me? Like I don't have high credit card debts. I'm not someone who's not paying my bills. But hey, things happen. And especially, I imagine, tell me a little bit about how perhaps medical debt comes into play. Is that a big piece of that?
Oh yeah, medical debt is a huge piece. I have not checked the figures lately, but at one point in the last 10 years, 50% of all bankruptcy filings were due to medical bills. That people had suffered, an individual or a family member had suffered some medical condition, accident, injury, etc., that was not fully covered, or covered at all maybe, in some instances by insurance. And as a result, those individuals found that what they considered their best alternative was to file bankruptcy to discharge that debt. And medical bills are an interesting area. I used to work for doing collections for a hospital group here in California that was run by a church. And every time I had to go to court with them, they sent their collection specialist from their local office. And the first thing she would tell me was, we have sent out to this individual our charity form, and they have not sent it back. And the first time I heard that, I had to sit and ask the questions, had to ask several questions. And what it turned out is with this particular hospital group, because they are run by a church, they had set up a program where if an individual who could not pay their bill would submit an application, there was a process where all or part of that debt, that medical bill, could be forgiven as part of that group's charitable actions. And I have found that over the years, I've found that with other hospitals, that some of them do, some of them don't. But as my oldest daughter reminds me constantly when something like this comes up, if you don't ask the question, the answer is always no. So I encourage people, if you have a debt, specifically in the medical field, but any debt, communication with the creditor can sometimes be the difference between making a plan, a workable plan for repayment, and be looking at a court judgment that you may never be able to pay off.
Yeah, that's a piece right there. One of the biggest reasons we wanted to have you on is that, hey, communication is key, and you're communicating in a situation that can be quite tense, right? Somebody's owed some money. You really ought to pay them. You might not have that ability to pay them. A lot of people listening are perhaps higher than average income and higher than average investments, and yet medical debt is something that could happen to just about anyone. You know, who knows when all of a sudden a job changes and the insurance gets dropped, or something changes with your own personal situation that, hey, this is something you ought to be aware of on different things. And yet there could be a point where it gets to a bankruptcy. What's funny, I'm going to talk about that real quick. I just looked at a few of the sentences on your website. I thought, oh, you must be one of those people that just do bankruptcy all the time, but you're trying to hide it. And you said, no, I don't do bankruptcy. Tell me a little bit about that and why you try to avoid bankruptcy.
Well, let me preface that with bankruptcy today no longer carries the stigma that it did even 30 years ago, especially since about 2009. Bankruptcy has become a more acceptable thing to have done. I think I would almost bet that every one of of those listening today knows someone in their circle of friends or family that has filed bankruptcy in the last 10 years, last 10 to 20 years. And bankruptcy is a tool that can be used in proper situations. But it also comes with consequences. And one such consequence is a creditor. Okay, here's a typical bankruptcy. You go in, you say, I have more debts than I have assets, more debts than I can pay off. I'm going to file what's called a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which is for an individual or individuals filing bankruptcy. And the goal of filing that bankruptcy is to have all of the debts discharged, meaning they are no longer owed. What majority of people do not realize when filing that bankruptcy is, yes, your creditor's no longer owed, but they can continue to report that to credit reporting agencies. So it may have an immediate effect on your credit or your ability to obtain credit in that manner. The second part of that is a bankruptcy, depending on which agency it is, remains on a person's credit record for 7 to 10 years. I had this discussion just last week about how credit affects our lives. I have a child who is moving from one state to another and is selling one home and buying another. And that sounds like an easy thing to do, but if she didn't have a substantial credit rating, she could be looking at additional fees, additional costs, and higher interest rate than she would like to have. Fortunately, she has a great credit rating, not due to anything I've done, but due to her own knowledge and commitment. She's able to make that move, sell and buy at an excellent interest rate without having to worry about what's going to happen when they ask for a credit report or any of those things. So it's important that way, that if an individual, at least in my opinion, if an individual is going to consider bankruptcy, that they ask the questions and do the research to know in what ways that bankruptcy will affect them and for how long that bankruptcy will affect them.
Yeah, I think you can give yourself a little credit for how well your daughter's doing. I got a feeling she learned a few things from you about all this. And that's really what you're doing. You've contributed a lot of articles to different websites on debt, credit, consumer laws, bankruptcy. I think you've educated a lot of us already about how bankruptcy is a last resort. Here's how it affects you. And yet there's so many things you can do ahead of time when you do owe someone some money to just come to a good resolution. You wrote an article for our website called 9 Signs You Aren't Ready to Retire Financially. We'll have a link to that in our website. And that's an interesting thing because a lot of people are wanting to retire and trying to figure out the right time to retire. And maybe you got to think not so much sometimes of here's the positives of retirement, but let's find the right time. And maybe you're not ready to retire because you've got to get into some financial shape. So that's a great article we'll link to about ways you can get into the right financial shape to retire. And let's talk about a book you wrote. It came out just about a year ago. It's the Think Different, Save More book. We'll have a link to that on Amazon. Why did you write that book? And what are some simple tips? The subtitle is Simple Tips for Saving Money on there. What are some tips for doing that?
Well, one of them first is to, and I cannot take credit for this. I've listened to Susie Orman and other financial experts over the years and tried to incorporate the things that I've heard them say and find the way to incorporate them into my life and also into my dealings with others. One of the first things that I taught my children, which I had not learned much prior to having children, was that if you are working and you have bills, you should first pay yourself. Whether you can, and by paying yourself, we are talking about having some kind of savings plan. I know when I was a newlywed, my savings plan was probably about 0.1% of what I was earning. And you'll hear that figure and you say, well, what good does that do? So let me tell you what it does. This week I put $1 away. Next week I put another $1 away. Now I have $2 put away. Pretty soon, if I'm doing that every week, that becomes $52 at the end of the year. Now, $52 today doesn't buy much. But when I got married 43 years ago, $52 put away and not touched till today, even today, would have, just putting that $52 away, would have accumulated interest to a point that it would be a substantial amount of money. So regardless of how little it is, I have tried to live by that theory of pay yourself first. Put something away. Start with something, no matter how small it is, an amount it is. I have a friend whose young son had started doing some chores and was mowing his lawn and his parents' lawn, and one of the neighbors said, "Would you like to come over and mow my lawn?" And so he did, and the neighbor said, "Here, is this enough money?" And he paid him, and at first he was just absolutely astounded that someone would pay him for mowing their lawn. And then his father wisely said, well, let's go open a savings account. And he put that money into the savings account. And he kept doing odd jobs and taking the money to the savings account. And then one day he got his statement, and it not only said, this is how much you've deposited in there, but here's the interest that we are paying you to have that money in this savings account. And again, he was astounded because he didn't have to work for that money. All he had to do was leave his money in that account. Now, I'm not advocating that a savings account with your local bank is the best place to invest, but it's a place to start. And
yeah, that's exactly it. It's a place to start. And so many times we'll talk to people who are thinking of their kids, thinking of their grandkids. Like you start out, you said you taught your children. I think that's a good song. Teach your children well. I think, is that the one? Or Crosby, Stills, and Nash?
Exactly.
Yeah, think of that song.
It runs in my head always.
Exactly. Just teach your children well. And a lot of times the parents, grandparents are asking, hey, should I start an account for my kids, my grandkids? How much should I put into there? And yes, it'll grow to a big amount if I give them $1,000 or $5,000. And I tell them, that's wonderful, but the more important thing is not the $1,000 you give your kids or grandkids. It's the habit that they can create by having them put in their own money. So yes, a lot of times accounts like at Vanguard or Fidelity, someplace might have a $1,000 minimum. And if that's what it takes to get the account started, go for it. But really, the more important thing is not the money that they almost start out with themselves. It's the habit. You have that habit to put $1 a week away, and it doesn't matter if you start small. Just start and get in the habit. That's the biggest thing, especially when you start out young, to think different, save more, come out ahead in the long run. It's Jeremy Keil here, and I know you're listening to the Retirement Reveal podcast because you want to learn more about making great retirement decisions. I've created a free video course for you to do just that. Head over to 5stepretirementplan.com and sign up to receive this video training right in your email inbox. We broke down our 5-step retirement plan into bite-sized videos so you can get started on the retirement, investment, and tax planning you need to create a consistent retirement income. Go to 5stepretirementplan.com, use the number or spell it out. You'll get there either way. 5stepretirementplan.com. Thanks for listening, and now for the rest of the show. Well, good. Well, I want to finish up on a couple different notes here where you've written so many different articles. Two that popped to mind that when I was looking through them, one of them is top banking mistakes consumers are making. Share with us, what's the number one? What's the biggest thing? What mistakes are people making with their bank?
Well, probably the biggest mistake is not moving money to a higher interest bearing accounts when I just recently talked with an individual who came in and had thousands of dollars sitting in a savings account, and I said, is it there for a purpose? Well, no, it's just, that's my savings account. And so my advice there was, and I've seen this with many people, was then once your savings account reaches a certain point, start looking at ways to utilize it better. Higher interest bearing accounts, whether it be a money market or some other type of investment. And believe me, I am somewhat risk averse, so I constantly tell people, find those products that if you are risk averse, like I tend to be at times, those things that are guaranteed, that are insured, that carry the least possible risk. But I think the biggest mistake for people is keeping too much money tied up in a low interest bearing account when there isn't a need for it. Now, there are times that that may be a necessity, but you have to evaluate and see that you're not falling into that trap of, well, it's there, it's close at hand, it's easy to do. When it's close at hand and easy to do, it's also easy to tap into.
Yeah, if the money's more available, you can get the money out quicker. That might encourage you to spend quicker. And a lot of people just fall into the habit like you're saying, perhaps you've been with one bank that's down the street for years upon years. Well, they owe you something called interest. And if you're not getting what you're owed, you're not getting the interest you deserve that you could get somewhere else, you ought to be looking into that. I remember now here we are talking in 2022, probably like 2019 or so, interest rates were okay. Like you could get almost 2% on savings accounts online. And I ran into so many people in 2019 that were talking about how low their, bank down the street was paying them an interest. And I would say, well, go online. There's places called maxmyinterest.com, bankrate.com. You can research and find and see there's places that are willing to pay you almost 2%. And you're getting not even 0.2%. It's like 50 to 1 sometimes on these interest rates there. Now, of course, all the rates dropped for a couple of years. Here we are in 2022. They might be, coming back up again. So you are approaching the point now, if you do have a lot of money in the bank and getting a low interest rate, there may be some alternatives that are out there. But whatever it is, it's your money. You decided that you're going to keep it in the savings account or money market or something. You ought to be looking at what else is out there as an alternative on there. And it's worth getting. It's worth the effort. And sometimes, real quick on this, is people would say to me, well, I don't trust an online bank. I'd rather see where my money is. Okay, the bank doesn't actually hold on to your money. So you can see the building, but your money's not there. And then when I say that's fine, some people don't like to bank online. Tell me, how does it work with your current bank that's down the street? They say, oh, it's great. They got this app. I can deposit things online. So wait a second. You are doing online banking. You're just doing it with a bank down the street that's not paying you any interest. So maybe it's worthwhile to research what other online banks are out there besides the one you're using and get some better interest.
Absolutely, Jeremy.
Good, fun. Well, I want to finish out with another article you wrote, which is what is it like to date someone in debt and how to help them. You said you're married for 43 years now. I got a feeling you're not dating someone in debt recently, so this is maybe not personal experience, but a lot of people, hit their 50s, hit their 60s, hit their 70s, and they're getting divorced or becoming widowed. And at some point, they are interested in perhaps dating other people. And chances are, especially in your 50s to 70s, your financial situation might look a lot different than when you were 20s and met your first spouse the first time around. And I got a feeling this idea of dating someone in debt probably comes up a lot more recently for those folks than maybe the first time around in the dating scene. Tell me about that article and some tips for people.
Well, unfortunately, Jeremy, it happens to people at every age.
True.
I recently was dealing with a young couple in their 20s, and they were engaged, and the young lady found out that the young man had 6 credit cards, all maxed out, and other debt beside that. And the first thing she did was she said, I'm not setting a date with you until we address this. And he really looked at her with the evil eye. Well, but you said you love me. And I know it was a very hard conversation with her and with them as I met with them in regards to this. But the fact is finances are in the top 5 of reasons why people divorce. They are in the top 5 of relationship killers. So you owe it to yourself to understand, first of all, your own finances and where you're at, but also to know where, and to be honest about it, but also to know where the person you're dating is with their finances if you are getting serious. I mean, a one-time date doesn't require anything. You go, you decide you may or may not have a fun time. But if somebody is getting into a relationship, there needs to be at some point, in my opinion, a conversation about about finances. And that's what, and I've heard people say, well, they're my finances. Even if we get together, they're still my finances. That may not always be the case, depending on the state you live in. I see all the time, hear from people talking about divorce. Well, she's going to take her debt, I'm going to take my debt. That's really nice thing to say. But if you had a joint account, whether it be a credit card or some other type of loan, the bank does not care who said they were going to take the debt at the time of split. I have numerous times in the past filed a lawsuit on behalf of a bank, received a phone call from an attorney who says, well, I represented husband in the divorce and wife agreed to take that debt. And I say, well, that was really nice of her, but did my client sign a contract saying that they would accept her as the only one responsible for the debt now, after they both signed the initial application as responsible? So that's part of it. But like I say, the more important part to me is when getting into a relationship, you want to know your counterpart's circumstances in regards to at least have a good general idea of their finances, and know that you're not, because there are circumstances where even if that debt was pre-existing, if you come into the relationship, you could become responsible.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. It's not just the debt, but also the assets and the lifestyle. If you are someone that's dating, you might have different expectations of what expensive restaurant might look like. You might be pushing them further into debt to say, hey, let's always go out and spend this money that they don't have. And it could be an embarrassing situation. You got to have those conversations. And we'll link to that article as well, too, because that's absolutely important. Awesome. Well, Lyle, thanks for coming on the show. You shared a lot of stuff with us. Simple tips for saving more money, paying down debt, and hey, even talking about debt with maybe the person you're dating. That's important stuff too.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Jeremy. I appreciate the opportunity, and look forward to having further contact with some of your listeners as the need may arise.
You got it. Actually, what's the best way for people to reach out to you? I know we'll have links, but why don't you just let us know right now?
Well, the best way to reach me and to reach our group is at Oakview Law Group, and the website. I know that I'm going to say it wrong, but it's ovlg.com, or just Google Oakview Law Group, and our website will come up. It has opportunities to contact, to have virtual chat, as well as to have email addresses to be able to reach out to us, and so that we can contact and have communication with individuals that are maybe in need of our services, and also that would like to talk with myself or any of our staff on these financial issues.
Yeah, I've been through your website. It's got a lot of great information, so people should definitely check it out. We'll have a link to that, the Oakview Law Group and Lyle Solomon. So Lyle, thank you for coming on, and thanks to everyone for listening to the Retirement Revealed podcast. We believe if you know more about your money, you will feel better about your money, and you will make better money decisions.
Thank you for listening to the Retirement Revealed podcast. Click on the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit retirement-revealed.com to learn more. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Keil Financial Partners. Keil Financial Partners does not provide legal, accounting, or tax advice. Consult your attorney or tax professional. Representatives have general knowledge of the Social Security tenets. For complete details on your situation, contact the Social Security Administration. Keil Financial Partners is a part of the Thrivent Advisor Network, a registered investment advisor. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.